Welcome to Bold Thinking, entrepreneurial stories honestly told. In a world full of chaos, this is a podcast about the people making positive change in the world, using bold thinking to transform businesses and themselves. Today, I'm speaking to Nicola Hamilton, Director of Communications at Go Cardless, a Fintech brand that's just been ranked one of the best software companies for 2021 by G2. So welcome to Nicola. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's really, really good. And we had a little chat on the phone last week, and it's just absolutely fascinating, Nicola's career and how she makes things happen, action-based action. So tell us a bit about your career and what you do, Nicola.
I've been in B2B technology marketing for far longer than I care to remember. And I'd like to say that it was something that I always wanted to do, but I kind of fell into it by mistake. I wouldn't say by mistake. It was just I was introduced to an agency who specialized in marketing and PR for tech companies. And it all started from there, really. And I kind of fell in love with the complexity of technology. I think if in my early days when I was at university, and if I thought about kind of marketing and advertising and PR, you always think of B2C as being the exciting areas to work on. But what I really enjoyed was the fact that, you were talking about things that were quite complex and trying to make those simple for people. And I always went by the rule of thumb that if I managed to understand it myself, then the chances were that most other people would be able to understand it as well, because I'm not actually that technologically minded. So I have to work hard to make sure that I understand what these systems and everything are doing and the benefits that they bring.
No, I'm absolutely totally with you on that. I think it's sometimes, when we deal with some of the fintech companies, I have to sort of stop myself and say, look, would my mum understand that? Because and it's not saying my mum is super intelligent, so no issues there. But sometimes it can be really complicated to understand. So I love that. So Nicola, what does bold thinking mean to you?
Well, it's interesting because when you invited me to come on this show, I did kind of have a little chuckle to myself, and in the sense that I don't necessarily think of myself as a bold thinker, but I think, as you mentioned earlier, the person behind the bold thinking that makes it happen. For me, the bold thinking is about those people who have that vision, that creativity, that idea. But then there's always a team of people behind that actually bring that idea to life. And I would say that's where I've been throughout my career in terms of facilitating those ideas, and quite often staring at the person who's got the bold idea as if to say, you're completely crazy. What on earth were you thinking? And then having to go off and figure out how to actually make it happen.
Wow. So what's been the boldest idea you've actually worked on, and how have you made it happen? Because I think you're absolutely right. You can have some brilliant ideas, but if you can't deliver it, then no one touches and feels it, and it soon wisps away.
Exactly. And I think, the important thing I think is also, because we can all have that kind of blue sky thinking about ideas that are fantastic, but there has to be an air of pragmatism in terms of how can you actually make this a reality. So probably the most challenging one for me was the rebranding work that we did for MySys and D&H when the two companies were combining. And the thing that triggered that off was so that these two companies were being brought together. So it wasn't an acquisition. They were very much similar sized organizations, similar number of employees. One was more predominantly in Europe, and the other one was their footprint was bigger in the US. And the idea behind it was, when we announced that the two companies were merging, was that we didn't want it to feel like an acquisition from one side or the other. And if we'd kept one of the names, or quite frankly, when you have MySys and D&H, the combination of the two just didn't work well together. So there was a day when my CEO called me into the office and just kind of said, "So I've been thinking," and that always then shivers down your spine when a CEO says "I've been thinking" to a marketing person, and you think, "Oh God, here we go." And he just said, "It's like, so I'm thinking we should definitely rebrand about this." And I was thinking, and I was like, you know what, that's a great idea. And I'm thinking maybe 6 months after launch, we could, and I'm kind of with him all the way on this conversation. I was like, "So when are you thinking?" He's like, "For when we announce." And I just can't, and that was the moment when I looked at him, and I think my first reaction was, I assume money's no object, because going through my mind was just, oh my goodness, how am I going to deliver this? And I walked out of his office and I went back and sat at my desk and I started Googling top 10 branding companies in the UK. And I literally just picked up the phone and systematically phoned every single one to find out who were the people that I needed to speak to, because I knew that I could never do this if I didn't have a team of people behind me who knew what they were doing and could help me kind of put all of that together in what was an extraordinarily short time frame, because it was actually from the date of that conversation, it was about 8 weeks to when we announced the new company.
Wow, that is amazing, isn't it? I think it's a few things sprang to mind then. You can have these, I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I sort of view myself as an entrepreneur, having set up 2 businesses now. But you can have these big ideas, but it's 1,000 steps in the middle of that. And people turn around and say, "Oh, how have you managed to make that happen?" And you just look back and you think the 1,000 things you had to do to get to that point. And some people have no idea the energy and the effort, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's a thing. And I think the art of it is making it appear easy to everybody on the outside, and bringing people in to see the results of the work that you're doing and the progress. But obviously it is like that, the swan on the lake, there's that furious paddling underneath just to get everything aligned at the right time. And just to combine with that, we didn't just do the announcement and the branding, we also decided to launch it on the date when we had our global sales kickoff. So we had about 500 or 600 people gathered at Disneyland Paris for our kind of sales kickoff event. And that was when we did the big reveal of everything. The announcement went out, and we literally turned so we had everybody in the big theatre, and then when they left, so we kind of launched everything, the new brand, the new name on stage, and when they left, the events team had completely flipped everything around outside. So they just within the space of 2 hours, they just changed all the branding. So it went from being Mises branded all the way through to Finastra branded. Wow. So there was there's a certain amount of smoke and mirrors that you can do to give that impact. And I think it's knowing when to use that as well to really get people on board.
That is an amazing story. I remember listening to a CEO of a top cosmetics company she'd set up herself, and she said, "This is like the biggest 12-year overnight success," when she got bought out. And it was just like, and everyone was like, "Where's that come from?" So, how do you see, obviously, Nicola, absolutely, I know the team have loved working with you. How do you see this sort of like the agency value and the partnership of that? And what does that offer to you?
I mean, for me, that was that complete expertise, because we were doing everything from not just the visual identity, it was resetting the kind of the vision of the company going forward. It was looking at the naming, and obviously, just picking a name is not an easy thing. You have to make sure that you've got the URL. You have to make sure that it's, you can test it in different languages. We were a global company. You have to make sure that it's not already been taken. And let me tell you, there are so many names these days that have been taken. So it's just having people who'd been through that process before with other companies, who understood all of the different stages that we had to go through, and then really kind of dividing and conquering between us. Because I think the reason why you work with an agency is to bring in that expertise. So there's expertise that you have in-house at your company that they can't, and a lot of that was just getting all of that, the thoughts, the ideas, the strategy, what we wanted to be as a company, that sort of thing I could corral internally, and then having a team who could really sit back and look at all that and give it a completely fresh perspective, because sometimes you can be too close to something as well. So having a team who's just got a different view, different perspective, can bring you different insight from things they've done before is invaluable, particularly in that sort of project.
And I think also, I think back at, it's also the I've got so much admiration for, people like you in big businesses that manage to sort of like get through all the sort of politics and the stakeholder interviews and all that sort of stuff to make this happen at pace, because that is a massive skill set. You can literally keep hitting buffers from an agency perspective. But if you've got a client that's dynamic within a business, you make it look like a breeze.
Well, I think there's also something kind of when it comes from the top and there is that desire to get something done in a short time frame, actually putting everybody under pressure is a help. Whereas I think, we could have had that 6-month timeline. We would probably have come out with exactly the same result. I really don't think it could have been any better. We'd have just taken a lot longer procrastinating about it, to be honest. I say that with a smile on my face about the team who were involved, because they were probably like, a few more months would have been lovely.
No, absolutely. So how, obviously a lot has happened over the last year. We can't, describe the level of change everyone's been through. So how has the world of fintech had to adapt over the last year? Massive question, but, from your perspective, how has it adapted?
I mean, first of all, it's just recognizing that, technology and financial technology has just been in a really fortunate position, because I think in the main, as people have, moved to working from home, looked at how they do things, kind of the whole trends in the acceleration of using digital technologies has really kind of boosted the sector. So, I do sit back and kind of count myself very fortunate for being in a sector that has been able to continue, not completely unscathed. Go Cardless has definitely had, so we saw some decreases in revenue. Some of our merchants were affected. So, and I think that's the same across the board. But overall, I think it's probably accelerated the appreciation of fintech and what it can bring, whether that's on the consumer side or the business side, and has given people that kind of boost, if you like, that reason to look at how they're doing things and maybe see if there are better ways and have a go at doing something else. So I think, it's been really interesting. And what we saw at the end of last year in particular, Go Cardless did a big fundraise, but so did so many other companies. There's a huge investment in this space, not just in the UK, but in Europe and globally as well. And I think it's just seeing that there are so many options now for people to be able to think differently and to do things differently, and just make their businesses more efficient and more effective. And I think sometimes, particularly when you look at smaller businesses, that's a big thing, because they may not be that tech savvy and it's something that's new to them. So how can you help them to make it as simple as possible in terms of that transition?
Oh, I mean, it's remarkable. Even a really good friend of mine, her whole, restaurant business with, 70 staff has had to go online and pick up parcels, and it's been absolutely revolutionary. Do you think anything will go back to the way it was, or we're just moving forward now? Is there no going back? How can we get that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't think things will go, at least in my world, I don't think things will go back entirely. And I think that the key, is flexibility. And I think the businesses that have, managed to survive over the past 12 months are the ones that have just had that flexible mindset. They've been able to, shift themselves, as you mentioned, the restaurant companies, businesses where, close to where I live, who suddenly set up, food delivery services, restaurants that have switched to takeout, all sorts of things. I think for those people who've just been able to look at it and say, okay, this is a bad situation, what can we do to adapt? I think that kind of adaptability is, some of them will learn from that and probably continue to look at doing new and innovative things. And I'm saying we've got a great little cafe where I live, and I think 2 weeks ago we were just walking up in the village and it was like, why is there that massive queue outside? And what they'd done was they started doing crepes, like the French. So they got the proper crepe stand, and it actually, you could see people queuing with their children because it was a treat and it was something different. And let's face it, there's not a lot different to do right now. So sometimes just those small ideas can have a big impact on businesses. But I think the biggest one is just the shift in the way that we work. And I know there's been lots of announcements, particularly from tech companies, where obviously it's easier for people to work from home because everything's in the cloud these days. We all have laptops, you can all access things and do your work very easily. And I think the change of whether people will continue to work 100% from home or go back into the office is something I'll be interested to see how it plays out. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. And I think it will vary depending on the company, the culture. But I think what we'll see is more companies kind of maintaining offices, but they become more of those meeting hubs and kind of places for idea sharing and conversations. And then people will go back home to do their work. That said, from somebody who is fortunate, I'm fortunate and have a lovely space to work in at home. I think for some people who are in, starting out in their careers and they live in shared houses, etc., they will want to be in the office because that's going to be better. But maybe they'll do more of their work sitting in a cafe, these pubs and cafes that kind of set up the little hot desking spaces as well. So I think we'll just find a lot more flexibility with people around not just working hours, but how they work, where they work, which I think is a good thing.
I think it's massive, and I think you're right. This sort of like roll with change is fascinating, and there's a whole thing about a resilience mindset. And for me, resilience mindset is about you've got core values, you've got a culture, but actually what you're happy to do is adapt and roll. So, in the world of fintech, how have you seen that adapt over the last year? I mean, you amazingly well placed just to ride on the wave of something, but has it had to adapt as well?
Yes, I think so. And I think it's had to adapt to the different needs of customers, because I think, for all sorts of fintechs, you'll have had, business from some customers will have declined just because of the situation that they're in, whereas other sectors will have boosted and had lots more people wanting those services. So I think looking at how you can, I think lots of fintechs have done good jobs of supporting the businesses who have had a hard time. And I think that, for me, that whole kind of customer service and customer experience has been really, really important, because, just because a customer is going through a bad time now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to come back and use your services in the future. So I think where we've seen that support for people, that's been a really, really good thing. But I think what they've also done, and I think maybe it's just through, because a lot of the fintechs are in that kind of startup, scale up future where they've really done a great job on the employee side in terms of well-being and supporting their employees as well. I think that's maybe, if you think about, some of the offices which have the fridges full of soft drinks, that have the breakfast available and those things. It's almost as if that kind of culture was an easy extension to take that to people in their homes by delivering them little gift boxes, helping support people and doing things in a different way. So I think that's something that certainly Go Cardless have done a phenomenal job at, and we've kind of seen that in other organizations, similar organizations as well.
I think you're totally right. I mean, I've seen some amazing stories about big brands and organizations really caring about their not only their customers and their employees' well-being. And I think it sort of goes back to that thing around, culture and community. And I'm with you. Obviously walking around, London just today, really quickly in the centre, it's obviously deserted. And I think there's a massive lack of we're missing community, we're missing culture, we're missing connection. How do you think, we're going to be gearing back up when we're out of lockdown in the fintech world to this sort of community culture? Is there going to be a big drive to get that under your values and get people back together and support that?
So I think the community in the fintech sector is hugely important. And I think there's two aspects to it. I think if you look at the fintech sector itself, which in London, there were lots of activities. So there were kind of after dark events that people went to. There was a football league. For the people working in the sector, I think there were lots of activities that people got involved in that they'd be really keen to get back to and connect. But then there's also the side of connecting with your customers as well and your merchants. And obviously, we've been able to move all of that online, but looking at how that will get reinvigorated in terms of events moving forward, I think will be really interesting. I think there's an underlying desire from everybody to get that connection back, but obviously wanting to do it in a safe way. So I think it's going to be a little bit of trial and error to see what people are willing to do as well, because I think we'll see this gradual kind of moving back into things rather than a big bang of everything's back to normal, which, the lockdown and the way that that's eased will kind of dictate a lot of that anyway. But I do think there's, just getting that connection back in whatever way that is preferably off a screen will be something that, not just the fintech industry, but every industry will be looking at doing. I think it's just a particularly close-knit industry. So it's maybe, that things will start up again more than potentially in other areas, just because there'll be that desire to do so from people.
So how optimistic are you at the moment about the future and thriving as a business and brands?
So to be honest, I always look on the bright side. I'm always pretty optimistic about things. And I would say, I am optimistic about what will happen, but I do think there's still going to be an awful lot of change, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be trials and tribulations that come with it. So I think I'm optimistic long term, but I think in lots of areas there's just going to have to be a change of how people do business going forward, of what they're looking at delivering, and rethinking some of those ways and making sure that what they are offering to people is really useful and what they need. I kind of get a sense, and maybe this is just me personally, but anything that's a little bit too frivolous or excessive, I don't think people will necessarily be jumping back at those opportunities. I think it might be a lot more of a softly approach in terms of doing things that really stand up and make sense.
I totally agree with you. Nicola, it's really, really great. Thank you for joining us today. It was absolutely fascinating listening to you. And I think, absolutely right. The core for me is, you can have a brilliantly great big idea, but actually the 1,000 steps and how you make it to work is just so critical. And I sometimes think that's needs to be driven to the forefront because it's so important. So
exactly, yeah. And I think it's also, one of the things is is making sure that the people who are involved in delivering those big ideas get, and I don't mean this for a personal thing, but I think there are lots of people that contribute to lots of big ideas. And I think having that recognition for what they contribute is really, really important.
No, I agree. I think it's massively. So thanks for listening to Bold Thinking, Entrepreneurial Stories Honestly Told. You can find links to some of what we've discussed in the show's notes. And if this episode gets you thinking, share your comments on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram. Links are in the show notes, or contact us at hello@thehonestbrand.com. Join me next time to hear from someone else who's making a positive change in the world. Thanks, Nicola. Really good.